about parents. Where do they fit into the wellbeing programs in your schools and in mental health treatment overall? I want you to just consider, and all the talks you heard yesterday, there have been lots of really good programs, ideas, ways of understanding challenges that young people and children go through. But I want to invite you to consider, as Sandra mentioned in the introduction, the environment these children are in. The broad environment, the school's part of it, but the family, such an important part of the environment. And there are many things that we heard yesterday can't be modified in terms of temperament, biology, genetics, but there's a lot that can be modified. And parents are an important piece of that. So think about your school. Think about the parents involved in your school through their children, the parents or the carers or the guardians. And I want you to imagine. Imagine that your parents, your parent community, that they are, as you go into next week and the next month, just a little bit calmer. Imagine that. Imagine that your parent community was just a notch clearer about their role and the distinctive to your role. And imagine parents were just a touch more confident that they can be a resource to their children's well-being. You coming with me? And how many of you are parents yourselves? Have hands raised? You have a large number of you, parent and grandparent here. I'm very pleased to be able to say. Any other grandparents here with me today? Yeah. It's nice to get to that stage, isn't it? So let me tell you, as you come along with this journey of thinking about the role of parents, I'll tell you what I'm going to cover. And I will really welcome your questions at the end and make sure I leave time for that. I want to think about what's happening for parents and schools at the moment. What's the context of intensive parenting? Children's mental health and the family environment, looking at the literature and the research in that area, and then applying this research to how you can engage parents but not manage parents. Think about that distinctive. Parent support as part of your student wellbeing packages. I invite you to consider what you're currently doing. What I often hear when I speak to educators, school psychologists and counsellors is that they do know the importance of parents and regularly sponsor events where they invite someone in to do a talk. I've been that person many times. And the parents, a few parents turn up, not the ones you hope will turn up. And one of the problems that I've noticed in being the one who comes in and does a parenting talk is parents just hearing ideas without the opportunity to engage with them and process them. It doesn't really go anywhere. Have you noticed that in your school programs? Which is where I'm motivated to help equip you and others in schools to be engaging parents in an effective way. And I'm so pleased to be part of a conference that isn't about surface level ideas or quick fixes. So you read Propsych's mission statement for their conferences and it really fits. So I'm very pleased to be part of that. My journey with this whole topic, you've heard it a little bit in the introduction. Predominantly, I'm a child and adolescent mental health worker and have been for decades. More in recent times a teacher, a visiting consultant and supervisor in that space. But I have noticed all the way along my journey in the field how clinicians don't know what to do with parents, and parents are so anxious and frustrated trying to find the right help for their child. So that's been my clinical and research interest. How do we effectively engage parents so they can be a resource for their young person or child's recovery? And I hear from clinicians that they find parents often very defensive, and I hear from parents that they are hypersensitive to blame and judgment for good reason. So my journey through the mental health field has taken me to be broadening out to thinking about supporting parents better, developing resources to help them build confidence, and supporting other important domains beyond the clinical domain, the clinical service, to schools as such a strategic place to develop good partnerships with parents and carers. So what is going on with parents and schools at the moment? And before I give a little bit of an overview, I'm going to introduce to you a hypothetical family. See if you recognise them. This is Father Jeff, Mother Pam. They're at your school, very conscientious parents. They have 2 daughters. Their youngest daughter, Josie, is age 12, and she's in the 6th grade, hasn't gone to high school yet, but it's the school carnival, and the parents are both there. They're always there at every event. They're the intensive parents who are very conscientious, and I'll share with you different forms of intensity. But Pam and Jeff are sitting on the sidelines supporting Josie. You, as a teacher or a counsellor, you notice Pam hovering around Josie when she's lining up, getting ready for her events, supporting her, coaching her. She's very close to her. Then she gradually moves back to sit with her husband. And you notice that Josie has some other girls who are pushing in front of her, and Josie starts to crumble. Pam moves over very quickly. Jeff follows her, and you watch them take Josie away from the carnival. She doesn't get to compete in any of her events. Any of this resonating? But here's what happens next. Pam posts on social media to her friends in the school community that we have to do something about this culture of bullying which is not being dealt with in the school. She also sends an email to the school principal outlining that no one is doing what they need to. She watched the bullying unfold before her eyes. The principal sends the email straight to you, either the school psychologist or pastoral care worker, or to the teacher. It gets sent everywhere, and a brush fire has started. What do you do with that? And I'm going to be returning to this story as we go along today. So thinking about parents in schools at the moment, there's been a lot of press earlier this year from surveys done by ACU, the Australian Catholic University, doing some studies of principals' experience. Their levels of burnout are increasingly high. I would say that spreads to the whole school community. And here is what has been reported. Again, I'm inviting you to consider, does this resonate for you? That parents have become more demanding and are more likely than in past times to be aggressive. Schools want to be welcoming for their parents, but principals are reporting that they're experiencing often quite aggressive parents who have attacked them personally. And the president of the Principals Association, and this is an important quote, I think, parents have forgotten how to deal with problems face-to-face or over the phone, creating an unsustainable position for those in schools who are left feeling bogged down and demoralised. And another quote that I think gets to the challenges for schools and for parents in this increasingly anxious societal context. Students and families are getting more complex. The world has become more complex, coming out of the pandemic and lockdowns more complex. And there are not enough resources to support all the different programs and cater for complexity. As I've been attending these conferences, I've heard examples of teachers having individualized education reports sent for half of their class that they're expected to roll out, and parents have paid a lot of money sometimes for the reports, and they expect you as educators to implement them. It's impossible, isn't it? How does a teacher and an educator define realistic expectations to their parent body? And one principle, a quote that appeared in the newspapers in March, saying there's a considerable increase in parental anxiety, which may reflect increasing anxiety in society overall. We do live in an era of intensive parenting. Even those of you as parents, can you notice how overwhelming the role of parenting is becoming? How hard it is to figure out what your child needs, what's in your control to do, what's not in your control. And so I want to take a little bit of time to not load guilt onto parents around intensity, but to look at the forces in society that are fueling it. I've thought about different versions of intensive parenting. There's the protective parenting, and that would be very much Pam with Josie. And then there's a co-achieving parent as a form of intensive parenting, a parent who is really invested in their child's success and kind of partners with them, does their homework for them, helps with assignments, prepares speeches for wanting to be a prefect, etc., etc. The co-achieving parent. The controlling parent. So intensive parenting is not just the Pans of the world and her husband Jeff. It's also the controlling, over-managing, over-monitoring and correcting. And then the modern version of the outsourcing parent. Really busy, stressed parents trying to make ends meet with the cost of living increases and outsourcing so much of the caretaking and the extracurricular and the tutoring, etc., to others in the community, and indeed outsourcing to mental health professionals and OTs and doing a whole lot of sending their children out to be fixed or supported. Now, which of these, for the parents in the room, might you be most vulnerable to falling into? I'll admit the category as I look back on when my children who are now young adults, hardly even young adults in their late 30s, when they were in school, particularly high school, and high school was a challenging time for me socially, so I really secured myself through doing well academically, leadership roles. I knew I made my parents proud from that. So guess which of these ones I was most prone to? A co-achieving parent. Shoring up my anxiety about my kids through really being invested in their successes. In themselves, these things are not wrong. If it's just natural support of our children, they need that. But I'm talking about when the intensity gets dialed up and what's the effect on children when that occurs. So let me run through a little bit of thinking about this age of the helicopter parenting and its social context. I've been doing some talks in Canada and the US in April, And I discovered a different term for it, which definitely doesn't apply in Adelaide. The snowplow parent is the one that they use. There's a very interesting body of work written by Professor Peter Stearns from George Mason University in Washington, D.C. He's a historian rather than a mental health professional. And what he's done he looks at the markers of parenting anxiety and other historical markers going over a long period of time. He's written a very interesting book, and this is the cover of it, you can see here, called Anxious Parents. And what he did is he tracked over the 20th century for American parents, looking at historical data to measure spikes in parent anxiety. I wonder, when you think back to the last century, it feels like a long time ago now, the 20th century, but what decade would you imagine showed the greatest increase in markers of parenting anxiety and reduction in their confidence? Just have a think for a moment what you would guess it would be. None of us were alive through all of it, so it's hard to know, but you may be very surprised. I was, to hear that the greatest spike in parent anxiety and loss of confidence was the 1920s. Now, there's a lot of things going on coming out of World War I. Society is changing a good deal, but here is a really important shift in the 1920s. The very first parenting manuals were published. Think about it. And what was beginning to happen in the 1920s, parenting went from being a noun, you were a parent, to being a verb, this is something you do, and parenting became professionalized. Parenting experts emerged, writing manuals, writing books, parenting magazines first came out. What do you think was the effect of all of that on parents? It's obvious, isn't it, when you stop and think about it? Parents feel intimidated, not up for the role, I don't know enough. And so you see the seeds of helicopter parenting go back further than one might think. And there's increasing literature out there on parents feeling intimidated, outsourcing, desperately wanting their children to be happy as their main goal. It's a tough world for parents. The last thing they need is judgment and guilt loaded on their shoulders. It's hard to navigate. A few other really interesting stats. Surprisingly, the data shows in sociology literature that today's parents, both fathers and mothers, are actually devoting more time to childcare than parents of the 1960s. Now, some of that's got to be a really good thing, especially fathers' involvement. But it's also just a little bit of a marker of the seeds of intensive parenting having taken hold, and parents feeling they're never doing enough for their children. Now, diagnosis and parent anxiety. Have a look at this quote here from a journal on sociology of health and illness that points out how medicalized childhood has become. And this is a problem. And I'll talk more about that and come back to Pam and her daughter Josie and Jeff as the dad and thinking about the challenges of diagnosis. Now, what is the problem of intensive parenting? How is it linked to children's vulnerabilities, mental health difficulties? Here is a quote from an article that I published quite some time ago. The topic you can see at the bottom of the quote, "We don't need your help, but will you please fix our children?" And I pulled out this quote because I think it really distills the key idea from Bowen Family Systems Theory, which is the key theory that I've trained in and studied, that when there is an over-focus on children, it leaves them with reduced environmental, emotional breathing space to be able to develop to their capacity. Now, I do want to say, and this is a key family therapy principle, it's not a unidirectional issue. It's not just parents to the child causing difficulties for the child. It starts that way, but the child is an active participant because as they're monitored, you think about little Josie, who's getting bigger, 12 now, and the signal she is sending to her mum and dad at the school carnival that she's not coping, will you please rescue me? It's a circular process. Everyone in the family is contributing. And if you think about the impact of this crowding of emotional breathing space, what I often like to do in a talk is demonstrate what that feels like here in the room. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop talking to all of you and I'm just going to pick out you straight in front of me there, because I've noticed that you were looking outside and not paying attention, and I'm feeling worried that I've lost you, so I need to focus on you and give you all my attention so that I don't lose you, because I'm very sensitive to rejection and you see what's happening? Do you see? What was it you said that? The room is closing in on me. Do you see the illustration and the impact on children and families? Now, if that happens occasionally, it's not a problem for children. But if that becomes fixed in place, it's a real challenge for children's development. And another interesting thing to note, you hear in my case example that Pam and Jeff have an older daughter who's in high school, and they're not so worried about her, and her functioning is very steady. No one's concerned about her. She has no mental health problems, whereas Josie is in an anxiety program at a local university and has a psychologist involved. Her older sister is free of that. Now, how does that happen? And most medical models would say that temperament is different and genetics would explain that. And there is some resonance that an inhibited temperament compared to a more external, extroverted temperament is more prone to anxiety symptoms, but it doesn't explain it all. So those of you who are parents, most of you here, is there one of your children who pushes your worry buttons more than the others? It's not even the distribution. All of our children get a different experience of their mums and dads because we tend to have a trigger of a worry focus on not all of our children, and it can swap, can go from one to another, but it's not an even spread of worry focus, which explains how siblings can have such a different coping experience. In my doctoral research, the key finding in interviewing parents at the beginning of their adolescence mental health treatment, at the discharge and 6-month follow-up, was that the parents who developed hope, sustained hopefulness, had stopped investing their hope in external experts to provide an answer for their child's difficulties, and they had discovered things they could adjust in themselves that would make a difference for their child. A really important finding that has shaped the development of the parenting programs that I've been working on since that time. I've incorporated the language of the parents that I've interviewed, so there's no jargon, no medical jargon, mental health jargon. My goal is to invite parents to discover what they can adjust about themselves rather than what they can change in their child. Just thinking for a little moment about children's anxiety disorders, which are the biggest clinical presentation in children and young people's mental health, I would propose that anxiety is kind of the baseline of every other diagnostic category. It's in there and moves into eating disorders or depressive disorders, because anxiety burns you out, depression's not far around the corner, and I could go on. But I think that looking at the development of anxiety disorders and seeing what are the family factors is very useful for appreciating that it's not going to be enough to just treat the child without finding a way of engaging parents. So the literature in brief is that, yes, there are multiple pathways and interacting variables that go into the development of a clinical level of anxiety in children, but parenting styles and the quality of the relationship is in there. Can't be ignored. Most models do stress the integration between nature and nurture, but environmental factors in every diagnostic category are still a huge percentage, and the family environment is a big part of that. And this is all the work of the Gar, Hudson and Rape group at Macquarie University, large areas of research that show child rearing patterns in the family environment as important contributors to the development of childhood anxiety. Now, this is tough. It's a dilemma, isn't it? How do you engage parents, give them this info, and not have them feel even more demoralised and helpless? A challenge. A little bit more literature on parenting and its connection to children's mental well-being and emotional well-being. This quote is an old one, but it was in the 1990s, the first time that there was serious academic attention given to parent overprotection. There'd been so much work coming out of Bowlby's work and Harry Harlow's study on how do we help parents to be better attached, and not much work on what's the problem with over-attachment. And this was starting to be looked at in the late 1990s. And we've already heard about the Macquarie University team and their research on children's anxieties. The two key factors are the parent over-involvement, which is either over-protection or over-control. So it's kind of the heads and tails of the positive over-control and the more negative over-control. But they're both intensive and they close the room in on children. There's really useful work that I'm following at Yale University and the space program, because it's one of the few places that is committed to programs that involve parents. We cannot treat children without involving parents. And I'm following their research and their program carefully because it dovetails with what I'm absolutely committed to in my own work. Have you seen the 2021 policy that was rolled out on children's mental health and well-being? A really important new policy document that talks about a change of direction in the field. How do we get policy implemented is always a huge challenge, but there is an Australia-wide policy that is moving away from diagnostic labels, that is talking about levels of coping and functioning on a continuum, and is saying we must involve communities and parents and carers in the treatment of children's mental health issues. So policy is backing this message up. But I know as I look at the treatment programs and the policies over the years, there is such a gulf. On average, it takes 5 years for policies to be properly implemented, and many policies just get forgotten about and gather dust. So let's come to the family, and I definitely want to make sure that we've got time for questions, and also that you take away some things you can apply next week when you're back at school. But this worry cycle is part of what I introduce to parents in the videos that I've made for parents and in the Parenting Manualized program that I'm working with and training mental health professionals to use with parents. You get this cycle. It's circular. It's not a linear cause and effect. And you can see here that you've got a parent worrying, just like Pam would have, and in the early stages of noticing Josie's shyness, and responds to that worry with increased monitoring, and the child will react to it because we are relational beings. We are so sensitive to the faces of the important people around us and their proximity, right to infancy. And so worry cycles can be put in motion ever so easily in a family. But if the parent can look at their part in the cycle, take their focus off the child's reactions and look at what are my reactions, it's the beginning of a change to the emotional environment of the family. Let me illustrate the concern or the worry cycle, relating it to Pam, Jeff, and Josie. So we've got Pam's concerned attention. In the early years with Josie, she's very shy. There's separation anxiety, and she also had a lot of health issues as a toddler, ear infections, eczema, reflux when feeding. So Josie's protectiveness was naturally, Pam's protectiveness was naturally triggered, and she would monitor Josie for how do I support my child with all of these challenges that she has. And Josie over time responds with increased neediness, which in Josie's case is dependence, but now she's hit puberty, she's also starting to be agitated and more demanding, and that's challenging for any parent where they've had a needy child who likes nurturing to a more oppositional child who swings back and forth between the two, very common. And Josie increases her focus, Pam increases her focus on fixing Josie, and Jeff, who is worried about how anxious his partner is, he just goes along with it. Whatever his wife wants, he will support her with. There's increasing support, and by the time we come around to 2023 School Carnival, you see before your eyes how Josie's capacity to calm herself, tolerate the normal shuffles back and forth of being included and not by peers, her tolerance levels are really low, which makes it very, very hard to manage, particularly going into high school. So let's get to what it can look like to turn this around. My goal with parents is to help them shift their energy, the direction of their energy from the child and back to themselves. And these are the principles for parents, but think about your role as an educator and a counsellor and how you can also learn from this. These are the things that parents get caught in, such as Pam and Jeff, that without meaning to, over time will diminish a child's growth opportunities. I'll let you follow them through, quickly jumping in to relieve a child's discomfort, giving advice or taking over a task that a child can, over time, learn to do for themselves, dropping everything as soon as your child is distressed, using quick fixes which calm us down as parents and adults, but you see the implications for children's growth, and over-comforting and over-soothing, or over-controlling and criticising. Now, Jeff and Pam don't fall into this split of parenting, but I want to mention it to you because it's a very common one that the family therapy field has been noticing and writing about for a good long time. And I just had an article published called Making Sense of the Parenting Soft-Hard Split. So what you get is one parent watches the other struggling to manage the child, watches the other parent putting all their efforts in to fix, and they get reactive to that and go in the opposite direction. Such a common triangle in a family, where you get one parent, usually the one who's not the primary, more involved caretaker, is quite critical of their spouse's over-nurturing and say, the child is not sick, they just have a behaviour problem, they need more limits, and back and forth it goes. It's a problem as well, and a very common one in families. So how do parents, and indeed educators, provide a growth environment for children's resilience and their capacity to learn self-regulation? Well, we just flip the others over. And you see, it's tolerating the work of the parent and the adult to tolerate a child being upset, giving space for a child to work through their own problems. Not many of the parents that I'm working with say, I have stopped giving my opinion and advice, and I say to my child, I'm willing to help you, but only when I see you put a real effort in yourself. That's the kind of shift that parents and indeed teachers can make. Demonstrating that you have other things in life rather than just dropping everything for a child. Able to say no to unreasonable demands. The magic word no. Calm no. Not shouting no. No, I'm not willing to go along with that. I want to be a loving parent, and if I say yes to that, I'm not doing my job well. Connecting regularly, non-anxious connection is what children need. Not too intense, but a parent who can be present, and this is a really important one for you to consider in the classroom and for your parents, to connect with the whole child, not as Pam is doing, and Jeff, connecting with Josie's symptoms all the time. How did you go at school today? Were people nice to you? Which children played to you? So many of Pam's conversations are focused on where she's worried, rather than getting to know the whole child and responding to them with their capacities to do better. So how can schools engage differently with parents and vulnerable children? Well, reducing the tension and intensity around the child is key. And this is what the parenting programs, and please come and have a look at them at our display table. And there's a lot of free stuff out there for parents as well that you can refer them to. But it's programs that believe and help parents to see that if you reduce the child-focused stress and relate to the child and the anxious parents, where you are managing yourself, not trying to manage them. Relate to the child and the parent's capacity, not their reactivity. Oh, that's hard to do, but it's a good goal to have and to begin observing. So I do commend to you the programs that we've developed in schools, and to just think about your own wellbeing program and whether there's a way to integrate a useful way of supporting parents that isn't just an add-on of a once-a-year parenting talk. And then in thinking about what you can do next week at school with the parents you're involved with, to manage yourself, not the parents. So you have this email that has been sent to you from Pam, and you sit down with Pam, you make a person-to-person time with her. You listen well, you listen to the common ground. Here's where we agree. Here's what I'm committed to in my classroom or in the school that I know is important to you. But here are the things that I can't guarantee. Here are the things that are out of my control. And what I can do to support Josie gradually growing her resilience is be a calm presence in the classroom, but I'm not going to rush in and rescue because I'm really committed to seeing her find her way. And let me tell you about what I noticed last week, where she stuck with a task and how I acknowledge that. That's what I'm working on as a teacher. What do you think of that, Pam? Invite the parent to share their thinking rather than their reactions. So, wrapping up, hopefully time for questions. Here's what we've covered that I've invited you to think about. We are in an era of stressed, intensive parenting. There is a problem with a worried child focus, and parents need to be gently supported to change their direction. And to think about as schools and professionals, are we inadvertently fueling their anxious focus on their child and contributing to their overwhelm and feeling intimidated? Both parents and educators, I've invited you to think about relating to the child and the parent's mature side, not their immature side. And for schools to think, how might deep parent support become part of what we offer in our well-being programs? So again, I invite you to imagine if some of these ideas could be infiltrated into your world and your communities, what it could be like to have slightly calmer parents over the coming months. Slightly clearer parents. There's no quick fix here. Just little notches make a world of difference. And parents who know the boundaries better between what's their role and what's your role. So thank you for letting me present these ideas, and I really welcome your questions and reflections.
I think that was a really on-point way to start day 2. I'm very interested to hear your perspectives, your viewpoints, and also your questions. So if you'd like to clap your hand, we're certainly welcome opening up this discussion on anxious parents. Thanks, Mike.
That was great, Jenny. Thank you. I was just wondering if your research focused on families where there might be a child with a life-threatening medical illness or severe food allergy like anaphylaxis, and what that does within the family context and that anxiety over parenting.
It's not been the focus of my research, but I talk to a lot of professionals who are working in that space with children with chronic illnesses. And what I would say is, I have a parent client at the moment, I'm taking them through the program. They have real issues with their 16-year-old's behaviours that they're struggling with. And they had a child with a chronic life-threatening illness who died 2 years ago. And for this mum, it's almost impossible to reduce her anxious focus on her other child, who's only become symptomatic. Since you would say that grief causes it, I would say yes, but also the mother's focus, her life has been supporting her very unwell child, and she's just redirected that to her other child. So it's a really important area to look at, to just have empathy for how hard it is for parents to get the balance right when there are factual, objective issues. I would still say that being able to support an unwell child without over-supporting is really important for that child's quality of life. I have a grandchild with a peanut allergy and we carry the EpiPen around. It's a challenge.
Yes.
To not let that become an over-anxious focus.
Yeah, I have a daughter with anaphylaxis and people often ask me, she's got a great temperament, so she's not had a lot of those issues, but people ask me what's made that difference, and I don't know, it's a tricky one as a parent, but I can definitely see how parents get into that anxiety around the allergy control involved. Yeah.
What are the factual reality needs of my child? That's what we're doing rather than have them rounded up and exaggerated. So hard.
It was a great question, though. And can I ask, just on the tail of that, I often wonder whether living in the information age is also problematic when you talk about intensive parenting. We have so much information, on our fingertips, we can Google away. Has that contributed, being the age of information?
Wouldn't it be interesting to see a study like Professor Stern's on the 21st century and the internet age and the spike in parents' anxiety? You'd hypothesize that it's a huge contributor to intensive parenting. There's so much out there that some of it terribly unhelpful, and how do you fact check? Really challenging.
Thanks, Kiara.
While I'm waiting for this question to come up, let me just put up another QR code you can link in that I just added last night that shows you some role plays that I do in parent talks that our programs give you access to, that will just give you how I role play 3 different parenting approaches. And they're kind of fun because it's very spontaneous, and I have someone, a grown man, playing a 7-year-old boy, but it's just a non-intense way of introducing parents to these ideas. So I've just made that available to you. Sorry, question?
Thanks, Jenny. What resonated with me is the description of parent talk meetings and parents who turn up, the ones probably doing this great, not so anxious parents. And I think it's wonderful to invite, I like the word, invite parents to be in partnership and reflect on themselves. Initially, any other schools that might want to contribute, how does one target, as it were, the parents that need to be part of this discussion? Because we are in that age where we're hyper-vigilant and we're very self-conscious and defensive about our parenting.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about insights how to get those target people into the room, as it were, to start that conversation where we can. I notice that you offer this training or facilitation.
Yeah.
So that's my focus.
Yeah,
Great.
it's the question I've been asking in working out how to resource schools in this space. And it's very new because I've moved to these programs for schools. We're just rolling out this year. So you'll be kind of our guinea pigs if you take them up. They're also extremely well priced because we want people to begin to utilize them, and it's a social enterprise. This is about getting the ideas out there. But here's the strategy. You get a bundle of videos to stream. One of them is a really short one that you can show at a parent information evening where you're talking, welcoming new parents to the school, the beginning of you're talking about study skills, you're talking about picking subjects, you include it with something else. So you get the parents there. You do need the support, I think, of school principals. A lot of parents will turn up if they know that the leader is going to show and be supporting that. So I'd be talking to your leaders. And the idea that I'm wanting to see if it works in schools is that people are trained in the basics of this theory so that they can facilitate small groups with parents, show short videos, case examples, role plays. They're fun, they don't load parents with guilt, but they invite parents to consider an energy direction. And there's a 4-part course that you can be trained to facilitate, and you can run it as often as you want, rather than this one event a year. And you can do it before school for a group of 4 parents. You can do it at lunchtime for 10 parents. You can do it in the evening for 20. So you're trying to integrate it into the different lifestyles of parents and invite some parent supporters to kind of be your co-helper, and especially if you're in communities where people are from a different cultural background, so you have a cultural representative helping you, having a look at the programs, being a cultural consultant and helping their community feel confident that this is not a program imposing Western ideas about good or bad parenting on them. So does that answer your question? Yeah.
That was a great answer. We had another question, I think, across here. Thank you. Thanks so much. Carol's bringing you the mic.
Hi. I was just thinking about I teach in a high school environment, and obviously parents are not putting up with things that their parents put up with, so there's a bit of that going on. And how much do you think?
Such as?
Oh no, well, I guess some parents they talk about that they grew up in a time where they were told to, just their parents were told to be quiet and they just accepted it. So they thought, well, I don't want that happening to my kids. So we've got that. But I think a lot of teachers, perhaps older teachers that I've noticed, haven't moved with that time. So they're still sometimes saying inappropriate things to kids or writing emails that they shouldn't do the wording. Do you find much of the complaints from parents are somewhat justified, and therefore, what role do we have, in schools to try and make sure that teachers are being very careful with how we communicate? Because we communicate more than we ever have, with online information now.
Yeah, watch how much you communicate, where people just get overwhelmed with emails and they don't read anything. So that adds to the intensity and the disconnect between schools and parents. I think your example is a good one because it just comes back to when people are anxious, they either go into relationally over caretaking, over correcting, or checking out. I can't do this anymore. And teachers can do that as well. So you get anxious teachers of a generation really struggling. They're often going to go into anxiously driven correcting. And so how do we all just kind of get our calm back is the key, I think. And also to listen well to parents. Sometimes they have something to say that is based on fact and needs to be attended to. And we've got to be calm to be good listeners.
I was going to say, sometimes, we have to, because I have to deal with some of those escalated ones, and sometimes you have to go, okay, well, that shouldn't have been said to you. And then once they go, oh, someone's listening, then you can have a few jabs at the end of the conversation about their behaviour, and I find that you do need to do a bit of give and take sometimes.
Yeah, it's a good wake-up call, isn't it, to just observe ourselves in this anxious field. How can we keep our thoughtfulness so we don't overreact to these pressures and start a circle of intensity with parents? Yeah, thanks for the question.
Another good question. I just wanted to ask also, there's a question down here while the microphone comes down to the lady here. Can I just ask, Jenny, you talked a lot about, which I love the idea of getting parents in groups. For secondary school students and for secondary school parents, my assumption is it's quite a leap to get parents back on campus. They're on campus when they're in kinder and primary school, but they tend to be a little bit more distant. How would you do that, encourage parents to actually get back on campus and be involved?
Start small with a group of parents who are keen to be involved and let them spread the word on social media. Like, these groups are great. Look, that's how people find out about it. So you don't have to, that's the beauty of small. And then parents find this refreshing. I hear that from parents who are doing this work. They're saying, this is a refreshing message, and I'm looking for what I can do differently, rather than a parent say to me, what they love about this message is they don't have to report back to the group next time that they've tried this new technique and it's been perfect. It's not about techniques. It's about a parent adjusting the way they're fueling worry or conflict with a child.
Thanks, Jenny. Thank you. Question down the front. That'll be our final question.
Thank you. I'm just wondering about, I'm going to call it the intensive absent parent, so don't have the facility to be able to outsource, or we are their outsource, maybe escaping domestic violence, and so they're so in their own space that they've pretty much left the young person to it. What our role might be there in terms of supporting the young person and or the parent when that may not be possible.
Yeah, it's a big question, and it needs more time than what I need to clear space for our next speaker. I'm glad that you recognise it as a form of intensive parenting, because when we shut down, that's fueled by intense anxiety. I can't do this anymore. So what can look like rejecting parenting is often just an anxious, overwhelm and helplessness, which is a version of intensity, and it has intense ramifications for a child's development. So it's important to not be judgmental and critical, and to partner, I think, with community organisations who can not be monitoring, not checking, not with a child protection hat on. I mean, there's a place for that, but not in engaging parents. So I'll think more about it, but it's not a simple thing, and you're limited in what you can do from the school in terms of connecting with parents. But never forget to find out the community that parent is part of and the resources in that community that are for positive connection and helping a person calm down. One of the key things that fuels intensity is isolation. The more that parents are connected, not to more and more professionals. I just talk to parents where their main social network are all the appointments they go to. So it's looking for natural community.